Imagine you sit down to play Monopoly, but everyone else has been playing for an hour. The prime streets already have hotels. The good corners are taken. You get your starting cash, you roll your first dice, and the board is already decided. You didn't play badly. You arrived late. Here is the uncomfortable part. This is the economy you are saving in. And once you see how the board got filled, you can never unsee it. You feel it even if you can't name it. House prices climb. Stocks climb. The headline says the country is richer than ever, and yet your salary buys less. The weekly shop costs more, and getting ahead feels harder every single year. So which is it? Are we richer or poorer? The answer is both, at the same time, and that contradiction is not a feeling, and it is not bad luck. It is architecture. It is built into how modern money is made and where it lands first. Today we draw the map of that architecture layer by layer so the contradiction finally makes sense. Start with one word that hides two completely different things. Inflation. There are two of them, running on two separate circuits. The first is asset price inflation, the rise in the price of things you own or must own to get wealthier. Stocks, housing, businesses, land. The second is cost of living inflation, the rise in the price of things you consume, food, rent, energy, transport. They share a name, but they are not the same machine, and they are not even driven by the same thing. Asset inflation is driven mostly by the flow of new money. Cost of living inflation needs that money to actually move through the real economy and get spent over and over, what economists call velocity. So the two can pull apart for years, and here is the key. When new money is created, it does not arrive everywhere at once, like rain on a field. It enters the asset circuit first, because the banks, the funds, and the dealers stand closest to where money is made. Asset prices rise first. Only much later, after the money has passed through many hands, does it reach wages and the supermarket shelf. That gap in time, that lag, is the engine of everything you feel. To see the lag, picture two water reservoirs, stacked one above the other. The upper reservoir is the asset market. Stocks, bonds, property. The lower reservoir is the real economy. Your wages, your rent, small businesses. When the tap opens, water pours into the upper reservoir first, and it fills fast. Asset prices rise. Water only reaches the lower reservoir through one narrow channel. Lending conditions, wage bargaining, credit reaching ordinary households. And here is the cruel twist. The upper reservoir doesn't just sit there and overflow. It drains back into itself. Buybacks, dividends, money chasing the next asset, faster than it spills downward. The water that's supposed to trickle to wages keeps getting recycled up top instead. So the lower reservoir barely fills, no matter how wide the headlines say the flood is. The water never stops flowing, yet you stay thirsty. That single image explains the whole paradox. Someone can feel poorer while the wealth numbers look fantastic, because they are standing in the lower reservoir, watching the upper one fill to the brim, with only a trickle reaching them. And this is not theory. Look at it in real data. Put everything at the same starting line in 2008 and watch what happens. The money supply, the water from the tap, nearly tripled. The stock market multiplied by 5. Housing doubled. That is the upper reservoir, filling fast. And the lower reservoir, wages rose by roughly 70%. Consumer prices, the CPI, by barely 50. The distance between those two sets of lines, the one that widens year after year, has a name. It is the Cantillon gap. It is measured in data, exactly how far you fell behind without doing anything wrong. Now, why does the upper reservoir always get the water first? A clergyman banker named Richard Cantillon worked this out 300 years ago, and it still runs the world. His insight: new money is not neutral. Whoever stands closest to the source benefits before prices adjust. Whoever stands far away only gets the money after prices have already risen. Follow the chain. New money flows from the Fed to the banks and dealers, to the funds, to large corporations, to smaller firms, then finally to wages, to consumer goods, to rent. Every single step adds a delay. By the time the new money reaches the saver, the asset prices it lifted have already moved. And here is the sharpest version of it. The era of quantitative easing proved the point in its purest form. Years of money creation produced enormous asset price inflation and barely moved the cost of living. The people who owned assets got much richer. The people holding only deposits and a salary did not lose to the supermarket, but they did not catch the rise either. They were simply left behind, quietly, by design. Back to Monopoly for a second. The chain is just the table. The bank is next to the player who's been there an hour. The hotels go up on the prime streets first. By the time the late arrival rolls, the board is set. Proximity to the bank, not skill, decided the game. So where does the water actually come from? This is the part most explainers skip, and it's the most important. The tap is not magic, and it is not bottomless by accident. Trace it back, step by step. A government spends more than it collects in taxes. That gap is the deficit. To cover the gap, it borrows by issuing debt, bonds, the Treasury's IOUs. So far, ordinary. But here is where the water appears. When that debt is in effect absorbed by the monetary system, when the Fed stands behind the market for it, buying bonds and creating reserves to do so, the borrowing turns into new money. The deficit is the spring at the top of the reservoir. The state spends beyond its means, the debt is monetized, and that shortfall becomes liquidity pouring into the upper reservoir. And there is a name for the moment this becomes the main event. When the deficit, not the strength of the economy, is what sets the pace of money creation. Economists call it fiscal dominance. You don't need the jargon. You need the picture. The tap is fed by the gap between what the state spends and what it taxes. Understand that, and the tap stops being mysterious. It has an address. Now put it all together. Who wins and who stays thirsty? Picture 3 rings around the tap. In the inner ring, right next to the water, banks, funds, large corporations. They get the new money first. They buy assets before those assets have risen, and they ride the appreciation that everyone else pays for later. In the middle ring, homeowners, index investors, business owners. They do catch the asset rise, but with a lag, and they meet the rising costs too. A partial win. In the outer ring farthest from the tap, renters, savers sitting in cash, retirees on a fixed income. They feel the rising prices first, and the rising asset values last. Or never, if they own nothing at all. Same economy, 3 completely different experiences of it, decided largely by distance from the spring. And to be honest about it, because this is a map, not a sermon, that gap is not a law of nature, and it is not permanent. In regimes where new money reaches wages quickly, the distance between asset inflation and cost of living inflation narrows, and the outer ring catches up. It is a feature of a particular monetary regime, not an eternal curse, which is exactly why understanding the regime you are living in matters far more than blaming yourself for falling behind in it. So here is the map. The single most useful question is not, what should I buy? It is, which reservoir am I standing in? If you hold only cash and deposits, you are in the lower reservoir, exposed to every price rise, and outside the upper one entirely. The simplest way ordinary people step into the upper reservoir, the thing asset owners do automatically, is broad low-cost exposure to whole asset classes instead of standing fully outside. That is not a recommendation to buy or sell anything. It is orientation. It is knowing where you stand on the board. Which brings us back to the table. You can't outroll a late start. The hour you missed is gone, but you can stop playing blind. You can see who's near the bank, how the hotels went up, and where the water actually comes from. The board was never random. Now you can read it. This is educational content, not a buy or sell recommendation. Understanding how money flows is a map, not a prediction. Your numbers, your horizon, your risk. If this clarified things, subscribe to the My Best Wealth channel. We analyze, you decide.